I feel absolutely retarded making this video. I mean, proposing a new monetization method would probably go over like a toothy blowjob with the community. But here's the deal. It's actually in the minutes from the last summit that CCP asked the CSM for Plex sync ideas. Thus, it is reasonable to assume that they either were or still are trying to further monetize the game. Now, I don't have experience in monetization nor game development, but I do know what I love about the game, and I wouldn't make a proposal if I didn't think that I could preserve those things. So, at least hear me out before you call me an idiot and suggest I go play something more my speed. And of course, we're all going to be a big group of Fonzies here. And what's Fonzie like?
It's cool.
What?
Cool.
Correctamundo. And that's what we're gonna be. We're gonna be cool.
If there were going to be further changes to monetization in EVE, I would want them to be non-exploitative, avoid creating balance issues, and not be bad for morale. So I don't want the devs implementing loot boxes or creating problems just to sell us a solution. I don't want it to provide a larger benefit to certain segments of the player base, such as older players, or to be so powerful that players feel like they have to buy in order to be competitive. And this is important, but I don't want it to be bad for morale. If it pisses players off and causes them to unsub, it's going to be counterproductive for CCP's bottom line and remove player-driven content from the game. So, if you don't want players to riot, they need to feel like it's non-exploitative and fair. And of course, if you want them to buy it, they need to feel like they get something out of it. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that sounds like a pretty tall order. Is it any wonder why so many companies either screw it up or just say fuck it and don't even try? Regardless, I think I have an idea that fits the bill, so let's check it out. I believe that there should be a way to do neural remaps at the cost of Plex. I know, but hear me out. I have tried to consider the possible ramifications and how it might be implemented in order to make the most people happy. First, I think it's absolutely critical that existing characters keep any bonus remaps that they may still have and that players still get their one yearly remap. I think it's wrong to create a problem and then sell the solution, and I'm pretty sure most players would feel the same way. So, I think that would keep the players from rioting. Of course, this would probably leave CCP wondering how exactly it would be worth their time, but I've thought of that too. Obviously, new characters shouldn't get bonus remaps after the change. This will help CCP's bottom line, but based upon anecdotal evidence, it seems like a lot of people don't remap in spite of the advantages. Fortunately, however, I think that the proposed changes will go a long way towards increasing the number of remaps done. So, let's take a look at the underlying reasons why so many people don't use the mechanic in its current form. First, the current mechanics require that players plan and commit to a year-long training program lest they run the risk of suboptimal training times. I mean, it's absurd when you think about it, right? Most people don't plan ahead a year in real life, so why are we expecting them to do it in-game and then wondering why they'd rather just stick with the default remap? Regardless, a lot of players don't being locked into year-long skill plans. They might want to train a variety of skills, or they might just like being able to easily change direction based upon need or want. Well, the proposed mechanics will take care of that. No matter what, players will always have the option to change direction. Moreover, they will no longer have to have a year's worth of skills to train or feel like they need to get certain skills done first. Like, how many of you have done a remap, trained what you wanted, and then trained skills that were lower on your priority list just because you were already mapped for them? Or perhaps you felt like you had to get something trained up before a remap, otherwise you'd have to train it at a snail's pace, put it off for a year, or resort to injectors. So once again, the proposed mechanics take care of this problem right out of the box. Assuming prices are reasonable, players can remap whenever they want. It doesn't matter if they like the freedom to change plans on a whim, or if it's part of a long-term plan to minimize training times for particular ships and roles. So let's just go ahead and mark this reason as taken care of. Okay, and reasons 2 and 3 tie into the first. So not only are there a lot of new players who are unsure what they want to do, but older players actually warn new bros not to remap until they know what they want and how remaps work. So, assuming that prices are scaled to the total SP of the character and affordable, that would no longer be an issue. Moreover, CCP actually discussed with the CSM at the last summit about how to deal with new bros who brick their characters with bad remaps. Well, this would take care of that too. Okay, Implementation matters, but if done right, reasons 2 and 3 would be addressed. Okay, I don't know how many players do this, but I do know that I'm not alone. Alright, I am the type of person who finishes Baldur's Gate 2 with an inventory full of limited charge items and potions. Now, I have no qualms about using stuff with daily charges because they replenish upon rest, so I don't ever feel like I'm wasting them. But I'm always saving those single-use items for when I absolutely need them, and for the most part, that just means that I never use them. So, as you can imagine, I hardly ever use bonus remaps. I don't know how many other players are like that, but there's probably a few. Regardless, the new mechanics address this problem, so moving on. Obviously, there are a lot of players that remap. However, casual observation appears to show that a not so insignificant number don't. Self-reporting from these players seems to indicate that they believe remaps either require too much planning and or they don't provide enough of a benefit. Of course, they are partially correct. In order to squeeze the most possible SP out of your remaps, you do need to sit down with EMOM and get into the weeds. But there are other remap strategies that can provide some nice bonuses without a ridiculous amount of planning. For example, the 27 Perception and 21 Intelligence remap allows combat players to come out ahead as long as they train skills from the yellow and green categories. And that's pretty easy to remember, right? Stick to the left 2 columns plus rigging. But I digress. The proposed mechanics don't do anything to address these problems, so they would have to be handled in a different way. Fortunately, I think I have 2 possible solutions. First, CCP should create some sort of content that promotes the benefits of remaps and reduces the planning involved. And there is precedence for this. For example, CCP has done various things to promote abyssal content, and it has even provided a number of starter fits for players. And more recently, they even released a short video on how to make friends in-game. Regardless, they don't have to get crazy in-depth with it. Instead, they could do things like promote the Perception and Intelligence remap, or remaps for trade, industry, mining, and hauling. Promotion material should mention what they should remap to, what categories of skills they should train, and how much time they would save off of their training. And to be clear, I do mean that the benefit should be framed in terms of time saved. Increase your training rate by 7.5 SP per minute just doesn't sound nearly as amazing as cut 3 months off of your training queue or however long. Now, my second suggestion would require dev time. I assume that the amount of time and resources would be less than or equal to that which was required to make the in-game fitting tool, but my programming experience basically consists of modifying my brother's host file in order to send him to meetswing.com, so what do I know? Regardless, I think it would help if they made an in-game tool that replicated some of EMON's features. Namely, it should allow all players, even alphas, to put together, import, and export skill queues onto a mock character sheet, set remap points, and adjust attribute sliders to see how that would affect training time. Obviously, this would require more than an insignificant amount of dev time, but it would both help make planning easier and quicker, and help players to see the potential benefits. Anyway, I haven't looked at the metrics, so I could be wrong about all this. Perhaps most of the player base already remaps early and often, but if not, I do believe that proper implementation and a little bit of promotion would go a long way towards increasing remap frequency among the player base. Alright, next I want to briefly explore a pricing scheme, and then we need to consider how this will affect all the relevant stakeholders. Pricing can affect frequency, fairness, and community receptiveness. Thus, it's rather important to get it right. First, I believe that Plex requirements should scale with total SP. This would make additional remaps available to players of most levels of income, go a long way towards making the mechanic feel fair, and still allow CCP to get enough Plex out of the older players to make it worth their while. And that latter point should be of particular interest to the money men, since older players are likely to have more money, be more invested in the game and their characters, and looking for a cost-effective alternative to skill injectors with massive penalties. And yes, I do realize that this service competes with skill injectors. I will address that in a moment. In truth, I'm actually a little unsure on what prices should be because they can affect injector and MPTC usage. Of course, many players will make full use of every mechanic that can speed up their training rate, and different mechanics have different advantages and disadvantages. But you still can't deny that this service will compete with others to some degree. Thus, it is something that has to be considered. Another thing that needs to be carefully handled is the optics. Now, my gut tells me that anything above 500 Plex would be a danger zone, but I haven't conducted any polls or even asked around. However, I am certain that letting players keep the yearly remap and any bonus remaps that they still have would go a long way towards making them perceive the change as a consumer-friendly one. As for the minimum price, I'm sure CCP would consider 50 Plex for the lowest SP bracket to be way too low, but I based it off of what I remember it being like when I was a new bro. Like, my first billion IS worth of assets was a major milestone to me, so a billion IS might as well be a trillion IS to the guy earning 10 mil an hour mining in his first procurer. Moreover, if you set it too high, new bros won't be able to unbreak their characters. But on the other side of the coin, the same amount is trivially small to older players creating an alt. Moreover, you could implement a safety net by allowing characters under a certain age and or amount of SP to always be able to reset their attributes to the default remap. Needless to say, this is a complicated subject, so I consider my numbers as nothing more than a jumping off point. If I had to wager a guess, I'd imagine that CCP would set a price that is too high for new bros. That would be unfortunate considering how painful progression is when first starting out. However, there are other ways to improve early game progression, and implementing a reset button would allow new bros the ability to unbrick their characters. Moreover, the tiered pricing system should help the mechanic to feel fair, which is critically important. New players and potential recruits need to feel like they can catch up and be competitive with the vets, or they won't play. However, this is a subject I've discussed in greater depth in my video on the absolute injection augmenter, so I prefer not to get into it all over again. Regardless, I doubt that new bros would benefit greatly from the system because I think CCP would set a price that's out of their reach. However, a reset button would address brick character concerns, and proper implementation would prevent the mechanic from being perceived as a tool to help veteran players pull ahead. Casual players may wish prices were cheaper, but promoting the benefits and providing an intuitive and easy-to-use character planner would likely benefit both them and CCP. Casuals would be more likely to remap, and CCP would get the revenue from that. Committed players tend to place a high priority on progression, so they should love the proposed changes. They'd be able to get the benefit of faster training, but still be able to easily pivot based upon need or desire. Moreover, their income should make remaps very affordable to them, so I just can't imagine that they wouldn't love the change, but I have been wrong before. Speaking of which, I was surprised at recent player responses concerning free SP and the absolute injection augmenter. Based upon injector pricing, I assume that many older players still put a fair amount of effort into progression, but apparently a lot deprioritize it after a while. Of course, I kinda get it. If you already have good skills for the ships that you are most interested in flying, you probably won't care so much about training for less exciting ships. Personally, I'm never satisfied. There's always another ship to train for or another skill to max out, and I'm certainly not unique. Regardless, it's probably safe to assume that the hardcore veterans exist on a spectrum, and the vets that skew towards achievers and killers will be more likely to take full advantage of the new mechanics. After all, the new system would provide a way to accelerate their training at a much more attractive IS per SP ratio than the injectors offer them. Alright, now is when things get complicated. However, I'm going to keep it brief. So, real quick, the new system would put remaps in competition with injectors and MPTCs. I think a good analogy might be cell phones versus laptops versus desktops. Many people own more than one type of computing device, but if you own one, you have less of an incentive to buy another. Obviously, many players will make full use of implants, injectors, remaps, and accelerators, but some will put ISK and money into remaps that they would have otherwise spent on another product or service. So, my biggest concern is how this would affect injector usage among players in the top penalty bracket. Injectors already offer a terrible IS per SP ratio to them, so a more economical alternative might hurt usage considerably. Unfortunately, the issue is extremely complicated because you just can't consider injector usage on the older tunes, but also on any alts that players might create. And the same goes for MPTCs, Plex, and months of subscription that might otherwise be used as well. Honestly, I don't think that it would dissuade that many players from creating alts, because they offer advantages that can't be replicated with a single character. Moreover, injectors allow older characters to train up their alts very quickly, while remaps take time to pay off. Regardless, it is something that needs to be considered. Okay, if a player was training an alt with NPTCs and planned to cease training as soon as he achieved this goal, neural remaps that significantly reduce training time could reduce the number of NPTCs needed, and therefore the total amount of ISK and or money spent. So, I played around in EMOM with the Titan training plan to see the effects of different numbers of remaps. One remap optimized for the whole queue shaves off 47 days, but 2 cuts off a staggering 127 days when compared to the default remap, which is not unexpected as the skill plan is dominated by 2 large skill blocks. Past that, each additional remap has less and less of an effect. Now, you might be tempted to think that this would result in terrible losses for CCP, and you would be right. But here's the deal. CCP already gives out yearly and bonus remaps for free, and players creating specialized alts already use them to shave months off of their training time. Under the new system, players could still do the same, but CCP would be able to recoup some to all of their loss depending on the pricing and how many remaps were performed. Obviously, this is great from CCP's perspective, but things like this make it critical to allow existing characters to keep their bonus remaps in order to keep players from revolting. Oh, and I almost forgot, this service incentivizes players to stay subbed and passively training in order to get the most out of their purchase. Alright, that's all I care to get into. I knew it was a complicated subject when I started, and I still feel like it was even more complicated than I had thought. Thus, a lot of careful planning needs to go into implementation and pricing in order to ensure that CCP comes out ahead and players feel like they're getting a consumer-friendly monetization method that doesn't tilt balance towards any particular player group. Regardless, I do think that the proposed mechanics are capable of doing it. But what do you guys think? Good idea? Bad idea? This video makes you wonder if I'm a product of incest? Let me know in the comments or take it to the thread I created on the forums. Link down below. Speaking of which, I re-uploaded my Corrupting E for Cash video with the new introduction and set it to unlisted. The link is also down below. I think the new introduction clearly and concisely explains how I feel about the matter, and I do feel that I eventually made the right decision. But I also want to put it in my rear view so you can check it out if you want to know more. As for the future, my goal is to make fun and informative content about the things that I like. I also plan to extract every last bit of enjoyment out of Eve that I can while I can. And as long as the good outweighs the bad, I recommend that you do the same. Alright, I don't know what my next video will be on, but it is definitely going to be on something fun. Until next time, don't forget to support all your favorite content creators and fly smart.